So we're going to be thinking about a case for mercy to people who aren't Christians, okay? Now you might think, actually Julian, we don't need persuaded about that. I mean, how many of you are convinced, or how many of you would think, I don't know if we should show mercy to unbelievers? I mean, you can, if you think that, that's fine. We're not going to, like, you know, beat you up or anything like that. But put your hand up if you think in your mind, I don't really see that God wants us to show mercy to unbelievers. Okay? So we're all already persuaded that, yeah, we should show mercy to unbelievers, right? So why bother making a case? Well, because I think it's easy for us to be thoughtless in our motives for mercy and showing mercy, and thoughtless in our methods. Both of those things we can be thoughtless in. And it's important for us to be thoughtful in our motives and thoughtful in our methods. Okay? Just to illustrate the reason why. I think it's very unhelpful for us when we're unclear about why, for example, God would want us to show mercy to unbelievers. And it's unhelpful when we're unclear in the way that we understand Scripture. Sometimes we're very vague about these things. We just have a sense, I need to do this and I need to do that. It's just a Christian thing. And maybe that's something that you picked up just by being in the church. And in other words, it's just a value that you've adopted because you identify yourself as a Christian. And it doesn't really necessarily go deeper than that. Or maybe it's not just a value that you've adopted, but you're a gracious, merciful kind of person. Some people are more naturally merciful than others. The church isn't the only ones giving money out there in Africa. There are loads of unbelievers doing it too. And their motives might be the same as ours, and ours the same as theirs. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but as Christians, we have other motives, other reasons. And we understand, or we should understand, why we extend mercy. I was listening to a debate recently between a secularist, that's someone who says there is no God, there's only a secular humanist, there is no God, there's only the things in this world. And he was debating a believer, though, thinking about ethics and morals. And the secular humanists, you might think they tend to be less merciful than Christians. We might imagine that. But what he said is, actually, mercy should be extended to all creatures, regardless of whether they're human or not. He said, what makes a human of more value than a dog or a cat? He said we should think about, this is how he said we should do morality, we should think about what is best for the flourishing of any creature. What is a good thing to be doing? And regardless, forget about what kind of species it is, but what is the good that we should do to others, regardless of species? And we should do that. Now, one could argue quite easily, well, that's a really merciful guy. He wants to treat cats and dogs with the same dignity as humans. Okay? So he's motivated by mercy. But it's not God's mercy. And we can all be motivated by mercy, but not the mercy of God. You see, how many of us, before as Christians, gave money to charities? Probably most of us, for whatever reason. But it wasn't because of God's mercy. And it wasn't God's mercy that we was extending. So we need to be thoughtful. And I think it's also important to be reasonably precise as well. I'll give you an example. Very often when I read stuff about mission and mercy missions, there's often references. One of the favourite Bible passages when Christians quote the Bible about mercy is Matthew chapter 25. Matthew chapter 25 is the sheep and the goats. And Jesus says, when you did it not to the least of these, you did it not to me. And so the argument is, we're to do mercy to other people because when we give mercy to other people, we're ministering somehow to Jesus. And so that there's a reason for ministry there. But that it's true, that is true, but that is only speaking about mercy to other believers. When you did it not to the least of these my brothers, Jesus says, and that always means the covenant people of God. So if we're there, like I think it was Mother Teresa apparently talks about ministering to people who are suffering, that in each one she sees the face of Jesus. So you may have heard that. Well, if by that you mean everyone's made in the image of God, then I guess you can say that. But it's believers that are being made into the likeness of Christ. Unbelievers, the image of God in them is continually and increasingly being distorted. The Bible makes it very clear that when our hearts aren't turning to God, for as long as we're doing that, our hearts are hardening against God. And so when we talk about the image of God in all people, that's true. But when we think about Matthew 25, we can't apply it in that way. Do you understand what I'm saying? And this is the kind of imprecision that I want us to avoid. I want us to know, what does the Bible actually teach us about mercy to unbelievers, in addition to what it teaches about mercy to believers. In case you've ever heard what I've just talked about, Matthew 25, the key verse often that's referred to is when Jesus says, when I was a stranger, you welcomed me. And the word stranger is xenos, where we get the word xenophobia from. And it means foreigner, essentially. And so some people say, oh yeah, but that verse there, let's talk about foreigners. Well, in the Old Testament, the Levitical law provided for foreigners who became part of the covenant community of God. And Jesus was speaking primarily to Jews, so even that would have been people who were among the covenant community. And we know that because he says, the least of these my brothers. It's a covenant community, so I just thought I'd add that in. So, it's important for us to be reasonably precise. Now, we're not going to look up all of the verses that we could look at, just because of time. But one of the testimonies of the early church, I was meant to bring a book and read you a quote from a guy called Henry Chadwick, a fairly famous historian. And he writes about the success of the church, the early church's spread despite a lot of opposition, was because the word that he used, or the term, was they were unbelievably generous. The early church was unbelievably generous. That's one of the characteristics of the early church. Now, he might be right that that's, he may not be right about that being the reason for success, but it certainly was something that was noted about the church by pagans. So that even Tertullian, who was a Roman who hated the church, talked to, the famous quote from him is, "See how they love one another," the Christians. They're unbelievably generous. Here's a question for each of us. Are you unbelievably generous? The reason why I wanted to just raise that question and quote Henry Chadwick on the early church is because God wants, Jesus is unbelievably generous. And if we are going to become more and more like him, we are going to become more and more generous. And the early church is evidence that we can be unbelievably generous. Isn't that a good thing for us to be? Imagine people around here, everyone that knew us, many people that maybe hated us as a church, but they couldn't deny it, but they are unbelievably generous. The other thing that Henry Chadwick says, I would have brought the book, my mind, right, is really foggy at the moment because I've got a bit of a migraine. I've had it for the weekend, and so I'm just forgetting loads of things. But another thing that Henry Chadwick talked about was in how the church, in its generosity, preferred to be open-handed than risk not giving to those that really needed it. They would err on the side of generosity of too much rather than the other. And I just think these are good things for us to bear in mind. Throughout the Old Testament, we're told time and time again with mercy generally to be generous. So in Deuteronomy chapter 15 verse 7, we won't look it up, but it talks to the Israelites and says, this is part of God's law. Do not be hard-hearted. Don't be hard-hearted. By the way, we're thinking primarily this morning about motivation for ministry rather than the practical side of the methods. The reason for that is because methods, there's a whole load of work for us to do there. And we can't do that in the morning. And I don't even know the best methods, so that's something we've got to learn together. But in the Old Testament it says, do not be hard-hearted. In Deuteronomy chapter 14, the whole purpose of collecting tithes, not the whole purpose, but the primary purpose, was so that to take care of the Levites, that's the priests, and the vulnerable, the poor. The reason why they had to collect tithes was to take care of the poor, of the widows, of orphans, to make sure that everyone was taken care of. Time and time again, when you look through the Old Testament, you see exhortation to generosity. And we see exactly the same thing in the New Testament. We just thought about Matthew chapter 25, and that is about mercy in all kinds of ways, unconditionally. We see the same thing in 1 John chapter 3 verse 17. We looked at some of these verses last week, so we're not going to look at them again. And in James chapter 2, from I'll read that, verses 15 to 17. It reads, "Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and well fed,' but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead." Okay? That's a typical New Testament verse on mercy. But as well as mercy, as I've been talking about to unbelievers, the Bible teaches about mercy to believers. Actually, there's one other verse that I'll quote. There's Acts chapter 6, verses 1 to 7. We won't look at that, but that is where the church got organised. They appointed many would say the first deacons. They weren't deacons in the conventional sense, but they were servants of the church to take care of the widows in the church, to make sure that they're all properly fed and cared for. And in 1 Timothy, the Apostle Paul gives instruction about caring for widows. But in Romans chapter 15, we'll just read it, and this is from verses 23 to verse 28. This is how it reads. So Paul is coming towards the end of his letter to the church at Rome, and he writes, "But now that there is no more place for me to work in these regions," that's where he was, "and since I have been longing for many years to visit you, I plan to do so when I go to Spain. I hope to see you while passing through and to have you assist me on my journey there, after I have enjoyed your company for a while. Now, however," he writes, "I am on my way to Jerusalem in the service of the Lord's people. For Macedonia and Achaia were pleased to make a contribution for the poor among the Lord's people in Jerusalem. For they were pleased to do it, and indeed they owe it to them. For if the Gentiles have shared in the Jews' spiritual blessings, they owe it to the Jews to share with them their material blessings." So I just wanted to point out that verse. That's very relevant for us today, because Paul is saying, before I come to you and go on to Spain, I've got to first go to Jerusalem, to another country, because Jerusalem was famished, and Paul was taking the offering from the other churches to the believers in Jerusalem. Notice it's the believers in Jerusalem. Okay? Again, it's filling up the cup first. Very important. And for all the reasons that we thought about last week. But the Bible does also make it clear that we are to care for unbelievers. Deuteronomy chapter 23 and verse 20. So under the Old Testament law, we see that we are to care for unbelievers too.
I'll read from verse 19 and 20. Do not charge a fellow Israelite interest, whether on money or food or anything else that may earn interest. You may charge a foreigner interest, but not a fellow Israelite, so that the Lord your God may bless you in everything you put your hand to in the land you are entering to possess. But implied there is that as Christians we're to, or the people of God were to lend to people in need. Okay, so if they had a foreigner come into the land, they should meet the needs of that person by lending them money. Now again, mercy is favoured for the covenant community. They weren't allowed to charge interest to the covenant community, but others they were, but still they had to show mercy. And so we see mercy to outsiders there. In the New Testament, if you turn to Galatians chapter 6 and verse 10. We're not looking at many verses on this because most of the verses that we looked at in mercy generally extend to unbelievers, although it doesn't specifically say that. So we're just looking at a couple of verses that show that we do extend mercy to unbelievers too. Chapter 6 and verse 10. And let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. So then, as we have opportunity, this is what it says, let us do good to everyone, okay? And especially to those who are of the household of faith. So again, we see that principle. But what it means is this, we can't say, especially to the household of faith, therefore we draw a line around the church and we say, we go no further. There's a wall. It says, especially to the household of faith, yeah, but to everyone. In other words, we are not to neglect the care of people out there, okay? So it is the church, the believers, the covenant community first. The Bible's emphatic about that. But it must not stop there. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 12, may the Lord make your love increase and overflow for each other and for everyone else. And incidentally, in Galatians chapter 6 that I just read, notice this is what it says again. I'll just read it again. As we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone. Do good, it means good deeds. Okay, it's not just good intentions. It's actually go and do good. It's good deeds, deeds of mercy, deeds of grace, things that are going to be good for them and that are going to help them. So the Bible is clear. We extend mercy to unbelievers. But the more important question, I think, is why? Why do we extend mercy to unbelievers? These are the Bible calls them God haters. They've rejected the Lord. Why extend mercy to them? Well, there's a couple of verses that we'll look at. Luke chapter 6 from verse 32. Now, bearing in mind what we've read already about loving, let us love not only in words but also in deeds. Jesus speaking, if you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do you good, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount or with interest. But love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. And your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High. For he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. Why do we extend grace and mercy to unbelievers? Well, because isn't that what God does? If we want to be like him, then we need to be like him, and that's what he does. The Bible's very clear. When Jesus came into this world, he came for sinners, rebels. It wasn't that people were looking for Jesus. People were looking for the Messiah, but not for the Messiah. That was for their own purposes. They had no desire to worship God really, particularly. They were rebels. And yet Jesus came into the world and he died on a cross at the hands of people that hated him to save the people that hated him. That is the love of God. And it doesn't stop at those that like God, does it? It doesn't stop at God's children. We weren't God's children. But it's because God is the kind of God that he is, we have become the children of God. And so the reason that we do it is because we want to reflect God in this world. We are ambassadors of God. Surely we would pray, Lord Jesus, I want to be more like you. Then we extend mercy and grace to unbelievers. But not just unbelievers. Did you notice what it says? But love your enemies. Your enemies. How many of us are very happy to do something for someone as long as, and we'll keep doing it, for as long as they're showing gratitude? Right? But the moment they stop showing any kind of gratitude, suddenly our hearts turn hard, don't they? That's the way that we tend to be. Okay? Even for an enemy, I will show a bit of mercy, we'll show them how good we are, and hoping that they'll they are really good, I can't slander them anymore, and I can't deny it, they're a good bunch of people. Often it's pride that's motivating us. And but we're to do good to our enemies, to those who hate us, who are, it says in verse 35, ungrateful and evil. Show mercy. This is what Jonathan Edwards wrote. And I want to underline the third word in this quote. So make sure you pick it out. We are particularly, he says, and it's true, we are particularly required to be kind to the unthankful and to the evil, and therein to follow the example of our Heavenly Father, who causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. We are obliged not only to be kind to them that are so to us, but to them that hate and that despitefully use us. So if we want to be like Jesus, if we want to be a church full of people like Jesus, then brothers and sisters, here's our motivation that we might, for mercy. He is merciful. And we cannot be like him. If we say, Lord, here is my body, my hands, my heart, my head, I'm giving it to you, we can expect that he will take us to be merciful to the ungrateful and to a thankless task. A thankless task. That's what it seems to be saying there. Now, I'm guessing that you guys and me, we're probably not that different when it comes to this stuff, in that we don't really want to, we're good with being merciful and doing good to people that are appreciative. I'm sure about that. I know we're all good on that score, and praise God for that. But when it comes to those that we know don't deserve it, right? Them. We don't want to waste our resources on them, right? This is how our hearts play out, often mine does. I mean, I will not give examples, but it's true, isn't it? When people are grateful, our hearts warm to them, we want to do good, and it makes us feel good about ourselves. But when they treat us, when there's no gratitude in return, the main thing that we want to do is tell other people how ungrateful they are. That's the main thing that we want to do. We want other people to know how they've treated us after all that we did for them. We can't resist it, can we? We really want to tell people. And that is not grace, is it? And so here's the thing. If you're like me, then here's the thing. I think we really need to help one another to grow in grace. Okay? We're not going to do it on our own. Honestly, I've known this stuff for a long time. I've been a Christian for 20 odd years. I know this stuff. I can honestly say I've not really grown much in this at all, if I'm honest. And I think it's because I really need your help. If I carry on as I am, then I'm just going to be, I'll just be as I am. I don't in 10 years just want to be 10 years older. I want to be changed. I don't want to be like I am, just a bit older. I want to be a different person. And the Bible's clear that we need one another for that. We need to learn how to speak to one another, how to encourage one another, how to challenge one another. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 23. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering. Now, when it says the confession of our hope, it means all the things that we believe, which includes all that I've just said, right? Let us hold fast. See, we'll let go of these things very easily. But let us hold fast our hope without wavering, for he who promises faithful. And look at what it then says, the very next thing. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works. See that? You need to think, how can I stir Julian up to love and good works? Maybe think less about yourself and think more about me. I need it, I say it. So, or one another. I need to be thinking, how can I stir Grenville up so that he's not so, mean-hearted or whatever it might be. But it's true. I mean, I say Grenville because I know that he won't take offence. But it's true for all of us. We can all respond with mean hearts. And we need to address all of that in one another. And let us consider how to stir one another up to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together as some are in the habit of doing. You see, that meeting together midweeks and at church, these are our opportunities to encourage one another. So after the service, maybe be talking about this. How can we, what do you do in terms of mercy? And, if someone asks you that, actually make sure you ask someone else first, okay? Because otherwise they're going to get the question into you and you're going to feel embarrassed. But ask someone, so what do you do for mercy, Paul? And, or whoever it might be. And when they say, not really very much, what could we do? I wonder what we can do. It's encourage one another. I want to be more merciful, don't you? Here's what I want. I want to naturally be more merciful. I want mercy to be something that naturally wells up, and so that I'm not just a bit, I ought to be merciful, and having to chide myself and drag myself by the scruff of the neck to be merciful. I want it to flow out of me, and it will when I'm more like Jesus. And I'm sure that's the way that isn't that how we all want to be? So I'm not talking about us being legalistic with one another or, convicting one another and putting each other on guilt trips. No. That's not going to produce anything good. But to encourage one another. If we all agree we want to be merciful, let's encourage one another. And I was thinking about this, okay? I said I'm not going to talk about methods just because there isn't the time, okay? But I was thinking, progress in each of our lives may be slow. Progress for us as a church may be slow, but that is okay. Okay? Slow progress is progress. I'm good with that. I don't know about you. What we don't want is one step forward and 2 steps back. Or to sort of have a quick response for a few weeks and then we just go back to how we used to be, yeah? And this is why we need to get it onto our agenda as a church and start encouraging one another on an ongoing basis. At the midweeks, make sure we bring it up. If I'm leading the midweek and I haven't said anything, then someone raise it. What about mercy? We need to keep reminding one another, don't we? And that kind of thing. To encourage one another to continue to grow so that we become people who are unbelievably merciful.